In just 27 seconds inside a packed Phoenix convention hall, Donald Trump's fury cracked like thunder across 3,000 stunned faces. Cameras shook as rage collided with calm, every heartbeat echoing louder than the microphones. And when Barack Obama rose with one razor-sharp line, the room and the nation flipped. What happens when composure shatters chaos on live TV? In the next few seconds, you will witness the truth that they never wanted the public to know. No one knew this night would fracture the airwaves in real time. The Phoenix Convention Center glowed like a fortress of glass and steel, its towering panes reflecting the desert night, as if warning the city that something irreversible was about to be written inside. Floodlights carved the plaza in blinding white, and every entrance door swung heavy under the weight of thousands streaming in their footsteps, echoing like a march. Inside the hall roared, not with noise but with tension. The hum of restless breaths, shifting chairs, whispered predictions. It was the sound of a country bracing itself. 3,000 people filled the seats in a perfect cross-section of America. Teachers gripping tote bags still smeared with chalk dust. Veterans polished in uniform medals flashing under hot lights. Retirees leaning forward, their hands clasped in quiet hope. Students clutching phones high in the air, already live streaming their faces lit blue by glowing screens. Every row radiated unease, the anticipation pounding louder than applause. The cameras glided like hawks over their heads, searching, recording, immortalizing every blink, every twitch, every beat of sweat. Then he appeared. Barack Obama stepped out with a calm that seemed almost unnatural against the atmosphere crackling around him. His jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened just enough to signal ease without surrender. He didn't storm onto the stage. He moved like water slipping through stone shoulders, squared gaze, unwavering posture tuned to the rhythm of control. He carried no sheaf of papers, no stack of notes, only presence. And that presence pressed down harder than any spotlight, bending the tension in the room like steel caught in fire. The audience stilled, heads craned, every eye locked to him. Obama leaned back in the armchair, waiting at center stage, one hand resting on the armrest, the other brushing his chin. The posture was casual, yet sharp enough to cut through silence. He seemed less like a guest at a town hall and more like a commander seated at a war council waiting for the first move. The moderator tried to speak, his voice slicing into the charged stillness, but the words came thin like paper trying to smother fire. No one cared for his questions, not yet. The crowd's attention had welded itself to Obama, the tilt of his head, the faint half smile that promised both reassurance and danger. It wasn't a hall anymore. It was an arena, and they were not watching a conversation. They were watching the opening seconds of a duel. And then came the pause. The lights felt hotter, the air heavier, silence stretching taut as steel wire. Anticipation curdled into something sharper, suspense, dread, adrenaline. People shifted in their seats but couldn't look away. What had been billed as a calm night of reflection now felt like a countdown ticking toward the strike of something no one could name but everyone could feel. The silence cracked under the weight of the moderator's voice. Reed Lawson, a seasoned journalist with decades on camera, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, though his hands betrayed a slight tremor under the lights. His job was to set the rhythm, to turn this cavern of tension into dialogue. Mr. Sartar, President, he began, his tone steady but strained. When you look at the state of our democracy, what worries you most? The question was gentle, but in the hall it landed like a signal flare. Obama leaned back in his chair, his movements deliberate. His pause stretched just long enough for the audience to draw in closer. His voice came low and measured, a cadence forged by years of battle, but softened for the moment. I worry, he said, that we've started to confuse performance with leadership. He let the words hang like smoke curling in the rafters. The room shifted, bodies leaning forward, eyes locked on him, as though the very definition of truth was being drawn in real time. He continued, each phrase sharp yet unhurried. Too many politicians believe if they trend on social media, they've done their job. But leadership isn't about likes or retweets. It's about whether you make life better for the people who trusted you with their vote. The words struck with the precision of a blade, not in fury, but in clarity. Applause rose soft at first, then swelling into something steadier, like the sound of rain on a tin roof. This wasn't a rally's roar. It was an acknowledgement, almost reverent, a crowd recognizing the ring of truth. The camera panned across the audience, a teacher from Mesa, her eyes glistening, a veteran nodding slowly as if confirming what he already knew. Students frozen mid-scroll, their screens momentarily forgotten. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was medicine. The hall pulsed with warmth, the tension bending, folding, reshaping into trust. For the first time that night, the air felt breathable again. Yet beneath the calm, the storm line still flickered. From the shadows along the back wall, producers shuffled nervously, their earpieces buzzing. One note passed from hand to hand, a scribbled whisper on white card: "White House is watching." The words carried no detail, no instruction, only weight. It slipped across the stage like a ghost settling on Reed Lawson's desk as he adjusted his papers. He glanced once, lips tightening, before looking away. The audience hadn't noticed, but Obama had. He didn't flinch, didn't shift, but his eyes, just for a fraction of a second, narrowed, as though catching the scent of smoke before fire. Then, with almost imperceptible calm, he returned to the people before him. "Democracy," he said, voice steady, "isn't fragile because it breaks on its own. It's fragile when we forget it belongs to us, to all of us." His hand moved, open palm, slicing the air with quiet emphasis. "And if we forget that, then the shouting wins. The noise wins. And that, my friends, is how we lose something we thought could never fall." The applause rose again, louder now, the sound rolling across the hall like thunder breaking through a storm. Reed Lawson shifted uneasily, stealing another glance at the note on his desk, the words "White House is watching" burning holes through the paper. The crowd was leaning into Obama's every word, unaware of the shadow crawling closer, unaware that the calm they cherished was already being marked by unseen eyes. For now, though, the room belonged to him. And in that fragile balance between trust and tension, America itself seemed to steady for just one breath. The applause was still echoing like a steady drum when Reed Lawson froze, his earpiece crackling with sudden static. His hand twitched toward the small white card now pressed into his palm by a frantic producer. The ink bled under the harsh lights, but the words were unmistakable. Reed blinked once, twice, his throat constricting as if he'd swallowed fire. He tried to speak, but the first syllable broke halfway. Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, shifting in his chair, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. His voice trembled, a single thread stretched to breaking point. We've just been informed." He stopped and glanced to the side, then back at the crowd whose eyes were already burning into him. The silence in the hall sharpened, knifing through the air, every heartbeat suddenly louder than the microphone hiss. "President Trump is calling in." The words detonated in the room. Gasps rippled like a shockwave, cutting through the audience row by row. Chairs squeaked, heads snapped, phones shot into the air. The cameras whipped to catch every reaction, lenses hunting faces painted with disbelief. A veteran muttered under his breath, a student clamped her hand over her mouth, and somewhere in the back a reporter dropped his pen, the metallic clatter echoing like gunfire. All eyes shifted to Obama. The tension swelled, an invisible tide pressing against his seat. Would he flinch? Would he bristle? Would he rise to the bait of a sitting president barging into his stage, his moment, his night? But he didn't move. Instead, he leaned back deeper into his chair, one hand brushing lightly along the armrest, the other settling beneath his chin, as if he were studying a puzzle. His expression was calm. Too calm, almost amused, like a man who had walked through storms and now welcomed the lightning. "Put him through," Obama said, his cadence slow, deliberate, carrying across the hall like a command rather than a request. The crowd erupted into nervous murmurs, confusion colliding with thrill. The producers scrambled behind the glass booth, fingers flying across consoles, monitors, flashing with incoming signals. A giant screen above the stage flickered, static humming, like the growl before a roar. The audience couldn't decide whether to cheer, gasp, or pray. Reed Lawson sat frozen, his mouth dry, his papers crumpling in his grip. The note on his desk might as well have been a lit fuse. He glanced once at Obama, but the former president hadn't broken composure. His eyes were fixed ahead, steady, patient, daring the moment to arrive. The screen glowed brighter. The sound feed hissed alive. The room seemed to shrink, its thousands of occupants crushed closer, pulled into the gravity of collision. And in that razor-thin silence before the first word could cross the speakers, One truth hung over the hall like a blade. Calm had been breached and chaos was at the door. What happens when chaos barges into calm? The screen above the stage crackled alive, static flashing like lightning before a storm. Then his face appeared. Donald Trump, larger than life, the image blown across 20 feet of glass. His red tie hung loose, his expression sharp, his eyes burning through the feed with the fury of a man who had not come to converse, but to conquer. His voice hit the speakers like a cannon blast, booming so loudly the first row visibly flinched. Barack Y had to call in Trump, thundered his words rolling heavy and fast. I'm watching this whole thing, and it's a disgrace, total disgrace. You're sitting there talking about democracy when under your administration, jobs were being lost left and right. Under me, we had the best economy the world has ever seen. Nobody's ever seen anything like it before. Everyone knows it. The words weren't polished. They were jagged, meant to cut, meant to dominate. The audience shifted in waves of discomfort. A veteran clenched his fists on his knees. A retiree muttered under her breath. Students glanced nervously at each other. The sound filled the hall like smoke, thick and suffocating, curling into ears and pressing down on chests. The cameras swung violently from the giant screen to the still figure seated at center stage. It was the perfect contrast, Trump's voice crashing like thunder against Obama's silence, which loomed steadier, heavier, more deliberate with every second. Trump pressed harder, his face reddening, his cadence sharper. Manufacturing was dying. China was eating us alive. I came in, I fixed it, and the numbers don't lie. If it wasn't for me, this country would be in ruins. And now you want to sit here acting like you did something good. You didn't. People know it, Barack. They know. His finger jabbed the camera as though it were a weapon, each thrust puncturing the fragile air in the convention hall. The tension spread like a contagion. Some audience members groaned openly. Others sat stiff, lips pressed tight. One man shouted, "Let him finish," while another snapped back, "He's lying." The clash of whispers and murmurs rose until it felt like the floor itself vibrated with unease. All the while, Obama hadn't moved. He sat as if carved from stone, his stillness a direct defiance of the storm on the screen. And that stillness was louder than Trump's fury. Every second, Obama remained composed, the contrast sharpened, exposing the desperation behind the bluster. It was a duel without weapons, volume versus restraint, chaos versus control. The cameras caught it perfectly on one side, a man raging, his voice climbing higher, his gestures sharper. On the other, a man unmoved, his calm so absolute it looked like provocation. For the audience, the emotions ricocheted violently. Discomfort tightened into frustration, frustration edged into anger. The lines were being drawn in real time between noise and silence, force and steadiness, a president and his predecessor. The hall had transformed into an arena every spectator unwillingly drafted into its war. And as Trump's booming words battered the hall like relentless artillery, one question rose silently across every restless heart. How long could calm hold before chaos broke it apart? Trump's voice still echoed in the rafters when it suddenly collided with silence. The crowd waited, every eye locked on the man in the chair at center stage. Obama hadn't moved. His hands remained folded, his posture calm, his gaze steady. Seconds dragged, each one stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. The longer he refused to answer, the louder the silence became, swallowing Trump's thunder whole. The audience shifted, restless, caught between the urge to applaud and the fear of what might come next. A student whispered, "Is he going to say anything?" A veteran's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as if gripping a rifle again. Even Reed Lawson, the moderator, leaned forward in his chair, his breath caught, waiting for the blow that refused to land. The air was no longer filled with words, but with anticipation, the kind that makes every heartbeat sound like a drum against bone. Trump, still glowing across the giant screen, leaned closer into his mic, misreading the silence as surrender. His finger jabbed again, his words a torrent. "That's what I thought. Nothing to say. Everyone knows it. You were weak. I had to clean up your mess." His volume rose, booming, bouncing off the walls, desperate to fill the void. Obama left untouched. But in that desperation, the stillness on stage grew heavier, more magnetic, more dangerous. Then Obama leaned forward, Not a sudden motion, but a slow, deliberate gesture, as if the weight of the room itself bent toward him. He lowered his hand from his chin, glanced briefly at the audience, then back at the camera with the faintest curl of a smile. His voice came soft, deliberate, each word landing, with the precision of a hammer on glass. "Well," he said, letting the pause slice the air. "Looks like we've got company tonight." The hall broke. Laughter spilled out, not joyous, not free, but nervous, uneasy, the sound of people clutching for oxygen in a room too tight. The tension cracked, just enough for a ripple of relief, but only just. Reporters at the back scribbled furiously, knowing the line would ricochet through headlines before the night was done. Trump's image bristled, his face tightening, his shoulders shifting as if he had been struck. He snapped back instantly, his voice rising higher, but the damage was done. For the first time in the night, the storm was punctured not by volume, not by force, but by a single line delivered like a flick of the wrist. The balance had shifted not by an attack, but by the refusal to attack. The audience felt it too. Their nervous chuckles turned into scattered claps, their fear bending into something sharper, almost defiant. The silence hadn't been weakness, it had been a blade unsheathed only when the timing was lethal. And though the storm on the screen still raged, the hall itself now belonged to the man who had spoken less, but owned more. The tension didn't vanish, it changed shape. It curled around the audience like smoke, thicker, darker, more electric. Everyone knew the fight had only begun. But in that single exchange and that one crack of humor laced with steel, Obama had proven the unthinkable silence itself could be a weapon. And the crowd leaned in, breathless, waiting for what that weapon would cut next. Trump leaned closer to the camera, his face filling the screen until it seemed to swallow the hall. His voice roared, booming through the speakers, relentless. "People forget how bad it was before me. Factories, closing jobs, gone our military week, our borders wide open. I came in, I rebuilt this nation. Strongest economy in history. Strongest military the world has ever seen. Everyone knows it." Each phrase landed like a hammer blow. Each claim layered louder than the last, as if sheer volume could drown out doubt. The audience squirmed. Some groaned audibly, others sat rigid, their expressions caught between disbelief and frustration. A few clapped, hesitant, then stopped when they realized the hall wasn't following. The sound wasn't applause. It was discomfort echoing off walls too tight to hold it. Cameras cut between the furious face on the screen and the man in the chair below, still as stone, waiting. Obama hadn't answered, hadn't moved, but the very absence of reaction pulled every eye back to him. Trump pounded forward, his finger stabbing at the lens. "Without me, this country would have been nothing. Nothing. I fought China. I fought NATO freeloaders. I fought every crooked deal you signed, Barack. And I won. That's the difference. I win. You just talk." His words spiraled into fury, sharp enough to rattle Reed Lawson's papers on the desk. The moderator swallowed hard, unable to cut in, watching history unravel faster than his voice could chase it. Then Obama leaned forward. The motion was slow, deliberate, cutting through Trump's thunder like the unsheathing of a blade. He clasped his hands together, gaze sweeping once across the restless hall, before fixing on the glowing screen. His voice came calm, even measured, not in force, but in precision. "Mr. President," he said, the pause stretching just long enough to draw every heartbeat into sync, "I think the American people are less interested in who shouts the loudest, and more interested in who actually tells them the truth." The words hit like a detonation. For a split-second silence, then the dam broke. Applause surged, first a ripple, then a flood rising into thunder that rattled the rafters. Some leapt to their feet, others slapped the backs of chairs, the sound cascading like a wave rolling across steel. The nervous laughter from moments before had vanished. This was released defiance, a roar of recognition. Trump's image flickered, his face tightening, his mouth opening to counter, but his voice was drowned out by the hall. The cameras captured it perfectly, one man raging through a screen, his words evaporating, while another sat in stillness, his calm amplified by the roar of the people. The balance of power had shifted in an instant, not because of volume, but because of truth. The ovation refused to die, echoing long enough to force Trump into silence, his scowl filling the screen like a cornered fighter realizing the crowd had turned. Obama sat back, hands folded again. expression unchanged as though the explosion of applause were merely background noise to the point already made. And in that fragile pause between fury and calm, one question settled heavy over the hall, pressing on every chest like a weight. Can truth alone withstand relentless noise? The applause was still rolling when Trump's voice cracked back through the speakers, sharper now, cutting over the roar like a blade on glass. His face reddened on the towering screen, eyes blazing, jaw tight. Truth, he spat. You want to talk about truth, Barack? You lied about the Iran deal disaster. You lied about jobs, factories closed everywhere. And Obamacare, biggest disaster in American history. Everyone knows it. Everyone. His words poured like gasoline designed to ignite the hall into chaos. The audience split. On the left, groans and jeers shot up, fists shaking toward the screen. On the right, a handful clapped, cheering loudly, their voices piercing through the noise like stray gunfire. The clash collided midair, reverberating through the convention center until the air itself felt unsteady, trembling under the weight of fury. A woman near the front shouted, "That's a lie," while another voice answered back, "No, he's right." The sound cracked and ricocheted like live ammunition in a steel chamber. Reed Lawson leaned forward, desperate to salvage order. "Mr. President, please." His voice faltered under the tidal wave of noise. Papers slid from his trembling hands, scattering across the desk like feathers in a storm. He cleared his throat louder this time. Let's allow for. But no one was listening. The storm had swallowed him whole. Trump jabbed a finger into the camera, his volume climbing with every phrase. "You left America weak, divided, broken. I fixed it, I rebuilt it, and you'll never admit it because you can't stand the truth. You don't know strength, you never did." His shouts rattled the speakers, vibrating through the hall until even the lights above seemed to hum with tension. Obama remained still, unmoved, his calm a defiance in itself. But the room was no longer calm. It was chaos incarnate. Applause and boos tangled like dueling thunder, the sound so loud it pressed against eardrums and reverberated in ribs. The split was visible, raw, undeniable, a nation mirrored in one room, tearing itself apart with every word hurled from the screen. And at the center of it all, Reed Lawson's voice cracked, once more drowned in the storm. The moderator was fighting to steer a ship already caught in the eye of a hurricane. The question wasn't whether he could regain control, it was whether anyone could. The hall was tearing itself apart, shouts colliding, boos echoing applause, rattling like loose thunder inside a steel drum. Trump's voice still battered the speakers, raw and furious, each accusation hurled like shrapnel. Weak, liar, disaster. His face on the giant screen was flushed, almost trembling, as if sheer volume might bend reality. The moderator had lost his grip, his words drowned beneath the storm. All eyes turned back to Obama, waiting desperate, hungry for his reply. But Obama did not reply, not at first. He sat unmoving, shoulders squared, his hands folded in his lap, and then he chuckled. A soft sound, almost too quiet for the microphone to catch, but loud enough to ripple across the room like a sudden crack in glass. The chuckle wasn't forced or bitter. It was light, effortless, as if the storm raging around him was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. The audience froze. Then the laughter spread, nervous at first, then louder, rolling from row to row like dominoes collapsing. A teacher pressed her hand to her mouth, laughing despite herself. A veteran slapped his thigh. Students erupted in gasps and giggles, their phones already rising higher, recording, streaming, immortalizing. The hall transformed in seconds, chaos, breaking apart under the weight of humor, fear dissolving into release. Trump's image twitched, his jaw tightening as if the sound itself struck him. The camera caught it perfectly the moment a man built on dominance realized he had lost control of the room. He shouted again, louder, angrier. "It's not funny. Nothing about this is funny." But his fury only deepened the humiliation. The harder he pushed, the more the audience laughed, their voices climbing higher, feeding off each other, the release of tension turning into something wild. Obama leaned slightly forward, his smile faint but unmistakable, the kind of smile that said more than paragraphs ever could. He didn't need words. His silence, punctuated by that single chuckle, had flipped the balance of power. In that moment, laughter became a weapon sharper than any accusation, louder than any shout. The moderator exhaled audibly, relief flickering across his face as the storm eased into a rhythm he could almost manage again. But deep inside the hall, the people knew something larger was happening. Phones lit the air screens glowing like tiny lanterns. Clips of that chuckle, barely a second long, were already pulsing across the internet, destined to explode beyond these walls. It was no longer just a room in Phoenix. It was a country watching live, a nation realizing they had witnessed the crack in a giant's armor. History doesn't always roar, it sometimes begins with a laugh. And as Trump's fury boiled hotter against the sound of a crowd now laughing with Obama, the viral seed was planted. The audience sensed it even before headlines or hashtags could tell them. They were no longer just witnesses to a town hall. They were part of a moment that would echo far beyond this night, a moment already escaping the confines of the hall, carried by a single soft sound the chuckle heard across America. The laughter still lingered like smoke in the rafters when Obama leaned forward, his hands clasped, his eyes steady on the storm glowing from the screen. The hall quieted breath by breath, anticipation tightening once more. Trump's voice thundered again, desperate to reclaim dominance. His words a barrage of fury. "You think this is funny? You lied about the economy, about the Iran deal, about Obamacare. You divided this country and you call that leadership." His voice cracked against the speakers, ragged at the edges, straining to pierce through the air. But the laughter had already weakened him, and the silence that followed was no longer his ally. It belonged to Obama. The former president inhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with measured control. He didn't raise his voice, didn't quicken his pace. He spoke like a surgeon drawing the first cut, precise, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "Respect Obama," said his voice low, but resonant, "isn't about how loud you yell. It's about whether you do the work." The words detonated. For a second, the hall froze. Then the explosion of applause ripped upward like a tidal wave, crashing through steel. People rose to their feet in unison, a standing ovation that shook the floorboards beneath them. Hands clapped so hard they stung, voices roared, whistles pierced the air. The sound was thunder rolling and relentless, a roar of approval that drowned Trump's fury in seconds. The cameras captured it all, a sea of bodies standing, clapping, shouting their agreement, their energy electric, unstoppable. Reporters scribbled frantically, their pens struggling to keep pace with history. Phones shook in raised hands, live streams exploding across the internet. Comment feeds already surging with fire emojis, capital letters and cries of "he nailed him." On the massive screen, Trump's face tightened, his jaw clenching. He tried to cut back in his voice, rising above the din. "No, no, no, you don't get it." But his tone cracked, midway sharp, then faltering, betraying the strain beneath the fury. For the first time that night, his strength looked fragile, his dominance fractured by the weight of a line spoken without rage. The camera caught it mercilessly, the flicker in his eyes, the quick swallow in his throat, the unease of a man who felt the ground tilt beneath him. Obama remained still, letting the ovation rise and fall around him like a wave he had summoned. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. His expression was steady, carved in calm, as though the storm had never touched him. That restraint, that composure became its own weapon, the silence after his words more powerful than Trump's entire barrage of shouts. The moderator sat stunned, his papers forgotten, his mouth half open as the ovation thundered on. It wasn't the applause of politeness, it was defiance. It was catharsis. It was the sound of a crowd choosing one voice over another. And in that choice, the momentum of the night shifted visibly, palpably, irreversibly. Trump's voice rasped again through the speakers, weaker now, the force cracking under its own weight. He tried once more to shout his way back, but his volume no longer carried authority, it carried desperation. The audience had seen the cut, felt the sting, and knew exactly who had landed it. And as the ovation slowly ebbed, replaced by a breathless hush, one question loomed heavy over the hall, unspoken, but undeniable. When rage falters, what's left to hold on to? The roar of applause still echoed when Trump lunged back into the feed, his voice booming, but frayed at the edges. His face filled the towering screen, eyes, blazing jaw, locked as though sheer force of will could drag the night back under his control. "People love me," he shouted, stabbing his finger toward the lens. "Because I fight. I fight the fake news. I fight the corrupt elites. I fight for America when no one else will. The words rang out like punches thrown in desperation, heavy but wild, striking air more than target. The audience did not rise to meet him this time. Murmurs spread like cracks in glass, uneasy ripples, shaking through the rows. A smattering of applause sputtered, then died, drowned beneath a low chorus of boos. One man near the back cupped his hands and shouted, "You're fighting yourself." Laughter flickered sharp and biting, and the sound cut deeper than any heckle. Trump's mouth twisted his volume, climbing each syllable, rasping against the microphone like sandpaper. I fight for the forgotten men and women of this country. He bellowed, the words trembling under the strain. I fight every day harder than anyone ever has. That's why they love me. You can't take that away. His fist slammed the desk before him, the tremor visible even through the feed, a gesture meant to show power but betraying fatigue. The louder he roared, the more the energy slipped through his fingers like water spilling from a cracked vessel. The boos grew heavier, rolling now in waves that collided with his fury. Some in the crowd shook their heads. Others jeered openly, their defiance fueled by the contrast between his rage and Obama's calm. The camera panned across the audience, crossed arms, narrowed eyes, lips pursed in disgust. It was no longer shock, it was rejection. The tide had turned, and everyone in the hall could feel it. Trump leaned closer, sweat beading on his brow, his voice cracking under its own weight. You don't understand, people love me, because I fight. The repetition rang hollow, less a declaration than a plea. His image, once towering, seemed smaller now, a man shouting into a storm that no longer listened. The hall responded with a final, thunderous boo shaking the rafters, drowning him out. What had begun as defiance now felt like collapse, a spectacle of noise unraveling under its own force. And at the center of it all, the stillness of Obama remained a mirror to Trump's unraveling, a reminder that sometimes the fight itself is the mask that hides defeat. The boos still rattled the rafters when Obama finally shifted, leaning forward in his chair, as if to cut through the storm himself. His hands folded, his gaze unwavering. He waited until the noise thinned just enough for silence to hover. The screen still glowed with Trump's reddened face, his mouth moving, his finger jabbing, but the room no longer belonged to him. The audience had turned, their eyes drawn to the man who hadn't raised his voice once. Obama's breath was steady, his cadence deliberate, his tone sharper than steel. When you have to keep telling people you're winning, he said, pausing long enough for the words to hang like a blade in the air, it usually means you're losing where it matters most. The hall gasped as one. The words landed with the force of a gunshot, clean and precise, slicing through the last threads of Trump's fury. For a heartbeat, silence, thick, unbearable, electric. And then the dam burst. Applause detonated, not polite, not hesitant, but explosive, a roar that shook the walls and thundered upward until it seemed the ceiling itself might collapse. People leapt to their feet, clapping, shouting, stomping, the sound crashing like a wave of catharsis across the room. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, cameras zoomed in on faces wide with awe, and phones shot skyward, capturing history in real time. Trump's image twitched, his voice faltering as the ovation drowned him out. His finger jabbed again, weaker now, his lips moving, but lost in the hurricane of sound. His face betrayed it, the flicker of doubt, the flush of humiliation, the recognition that the moment had slipped away. He had thrown every punch, every roar, and still the knockout came not from rage, but from restraint. Obama sat back, his expression unchanged, letting the ovation swell and roll like thunder around him. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, but his stillness carried the weight of a man who knew the line would outlive the night. In that instant, the viral moment was born, a phrase crafted for eternity, yet delivered as if it were nothing more than conversation. The audience knew it. They weren't just witnesses, they were part of it. Their cheers and gasps, the soundtrack to a moment already racing across the airwaves. This was not a debate anymore. It was history unfolding in the raw, unscripted space between fury and calm. And as the hall roared, one truth rose above the noise, undeniable and unforgettable. A single razor line had cut through the storm, and the storm had fallen silent. The ovation was still roaring in Phoenix when the first clips hit the internet. A student in the balcony had already gone live on TikTok, her shaky camera capturing the exact moment Obama's words sliced through Trump's thunder. By the time the hall began to quiet, millions of screens across the country were already vibrating with the same soundbite captions, flashing in bold. When you keep saying you're winning. The line was no longer bound to a stage. It was airborne, viral, unstoppable. Twitter lit up first hashtags spreading like wildfire. Composure wins trended within minutes, followed by Obama vs. Trump, each tweet a spark feeding the blaze. Edits appeared almost instantly, side-by-side videos, contrasting Obama's calm with Trump's rage, slowed replays of the moment. The hall gasped, soundtracks added, like it was the climax of a movie trailer. TikTok stitched the clip to sports highlights, comedy skits, even classroom lectures. Facebook slower but louder, filled with relatives posting, "This is how you handle a bully." In living rooms, in diners and bars, people replayed it again and again, marveling at the power of a single line. News outlets scrambled to cut their own footage captions, blazing across the screen anchors, already calling it the moment that defined the night. What had been a town hall in Phoenix now felt like a global broadcast, each replay amplifying its gravity. The line wasn't just heard, it was etched. But while the internet roared with laughter, awe, and disbelief, another room trembled with fury. Inside the Oval Office, Trump paced in circles, his face flushed, his tie loosened like a noose around his neck. Aides scrambled at their laptops, drafting counter messages, digging for talking points, tossing out desperate lines that might slow the bleeding online. Say it was fake, one urged. Call it staged, another blurted. Trump slammed his fist on the desk, snarling. No, say it was rigged TV, rigged. His voice cracked, the same crack caught by every camera in Phoenix, now echoing in memes that mocked him mercilessly. Screens in the West Wing glowed with clips they couldn't outrun. Each replay drove the knife deeper. Obama calm, Trump unraveling, the ovation drowning his rage. Staffers avoided his gaze, terrified knowing that no memo or press release could erase the moment already written into the bloodstream of the internet. Outside the White House, it wasn't spin that mattered anymore. It was the loop, the replay, the viral clip cutting through millions of feeds like lightning. And as the country laughed, shared, argued, and replayed, one question lingered beneath the storm of hashtags and headlines. Does virality decide legacy, or does time? The clip burned across America faster than headlines could catch it, spilling from glowing phones into the heartbeat of everyday life. In a crowded diner off Route 66, the television above the counter replayed the line on loop. Forks froze midair, coffee cups paused halfway to lips as Barack Obama's words cut through the static. When you have to keep telling people you're winning, it usually means you're losing where it matters most. A retired trucker muttered under his breath. That's it. That's the truth right there. In a South Chicago barbershop, clippers buzzed and then stilled as the room erupted in laughter the moment Obama leaned back, that faint smile flashing across the screen. A barber twisted his chair toward the TV, shaking his head in disbelief. "Man, that's how you shut down a bully," said a veteran sitting nearby, tapping his cane against the floor for emphasis. The shop filled with applause, as if the standing ovation in Phoenix had echoed straight into their walls. Across the country, in a small-town classroom in Iowa, a history teacher paused her lesson when a notification lit her phone. She connected it to the projector, and suddenly the moment played for 30 teenagers who hadn't been alive for Obama's first campaign. The class fell silent, then gasped, then laughed as Trump's fury collapsed beneath a calm line of steel. One student whispered, "That's cooler than any speech we've studied." The teacher only smiled. History had just written itself in real time. In a Tennessee diner, veterans gathered around a corner booth, their plates cooling as the replay cycled once more. One of them, gray-haired and steady-eyed, leaned forward on his elbows. "That's how you shut down a bully," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had fought his own battles. The others nodded, solemn, yet proud their silence, speaking louder than applause. The waitress, tray in hand, stopped to listen, her eyes wide, caught in the weight of the words. Living rooms flickered coast to coast, families huddled around flat screens, children asking questions their parents struggled to answer, neighbors texting links to each other as if sharing contraband. In a small apartment in New York, a grandmother laughed so hard she slapped the arm of her couch, tears welling in her eyes. In Texas, a college dorm erupted in shouts and chants, students pounding on desks as the viral clip played for the 10th time. The country, fractured and weary, found itself tethered by the same moment, the same gasp, the same thunder of recognition. It wasn't politics anymore. It was a shared heartbeat. From barbershops to diners, classrooms to kitchens, the line had cut deeper than debate points or campaign slogans. It had become something ordinary people could hold on to, a piece of truth, simple enough to share, but sharp enough to sting. And in that unity of laughter, applause, and awe, America found itself for one breath on the same side of the screen. By dawn, the moment was no longer just a clip, it was a storm. Newsrooms from New York to Los Angeles scrambled to brand it, dissect it, and sell it back to the public as history in motion. NPR's early broadcast called it a turning point in how America remembers the clash of two presidents, the anchor's voice steady but tinged with awe. They replayed the line over hushed strings of music, framing it as proof that composure could still outlast chaos. But not every outlet bowed to the moment. On Fox, the Chirons screamed across the screen, "Rigged show, Obama ambushes Trump on live TV." Pundits spoke over each other, their voices sharpened with urgency. This wasn't a fair debate, it was a setup, one declared. Another sneered. He rehearsed that line. You could see it. Totally scripted. The network spun fury into fuel-feeding viewers, the story of a hero cornered, not humiliated. The debate was no longer about policy, but about performance, composure against noise, truth against volume. Their analysts pointed to body language, to the pause before Obama delivered his words, calling it textbook timing, a masterclass in restraint. The debate was no longer about policy, but about performance, composure against noise, truth against volume. Social media amplified the split-turning commentary into battlefield. One trending post declared, "This wasn't politics, it was a reckoning." Another, pushed by partisan accounts, thundered, "Wake up, America, media wants you to cheer for their chosen king." Between memes and arguments, the digital echo chamber grew louder, each side convinced it had captured the truth. For the ordinary viewer, the noise was dizzying. Talk radio hosts stoked their audiences into outrage or admiration, while newspaper headlines screamed contradictory truths. Obama shuts down. Trump blared above one fold. Trump refuses to back down, headlined another. Yet beneath the spin, something undeniable pulsed clarity. For millions who had watched it live, the memory of the hall, the gasp, the ovation, none of that could be erased by talking heads. They had felt it in real time, and no flood of commentary could wash away the weight of that silence, the precision of that line. The frenzy built in fractured noise against truth, each moment replayed until it felt larger than the event itself. But whether it was called a turning point or a trick, the seed had already been planted. And in the clash of narratives, America was left staring at a question too sharp to ignore. Was this just another viral moment, or the night the balance of power truly shifted? By nightfall, the line was everywhere. In living rooms, phones lit up with endless replays. In subway cars, commuters passed one another, the clip wordlessly shaking their heads or smirking with disbelief. At dinner tables, families argued over what it meant, some calling it the truth America needed, others dismissing it as a stage ambush. Yet even in the heat of disagreement, every household was watching the same moment over and over again. On college campuses, students blasted the clip through Bluetooth speakers. In dorm lounges, some cheering, some mocking, but none able to look away. In rural diners, old men leaned over their coffee mugs, replaying the words on small phone screens, one muttering, "Doesn't matter which side you're on, you'll remember that line." In big city bars, arguments spilled across stools and tables, but each argument began with the same spark, the soundbite that had already become legend. Cable news fanned the flames. Panels stacked with strategists shouted past each other, one side claiming the line proved Obama's mastery, the other calling it hollow theater. Yet even the skeptics replayed it on loop, unable to avoid showing the very moment they tried to dismiss. The repetition itself turned the line into a cultural mirror, reflecting not just politics, but the way a nation consumed truth when it came packaged in 10 perfect words. Online, the division sharpened, but so did the connection. Comment sections turned into battlefields, hashtags waged war, but every skirmish was fought under the same banner, the clip itself. People weren't just debating, they were circulating, amplifying, immortalizing. The line had escaped ownership. No one could control it now. It belonged to the collective, a shard of truth, or at least the echo of truth that everyone felt compelled to touch. For the first time in years, America's fractured public had found a single moment it could not ignore. It didn't unite them in agreement, but it did bind them in memory. They argued, they laughed, they raged, but they replayed. The country, divided as ever, was tethered by the same pulse, the same gasp, the same eruption of applause in a Phoenix Hall. And as the clips surged past borders and time zones, a question settled in the back of every mind, quiet but insistent: is truth only powerful when it trends? Behind the sealed doors of the Oval Office, the glow of television screens painted the room in a relentless loop. Every channel replayed the same clip, the same line, the same ovation that swallowed Trump's voice whole. He paced like a caged animal, fists clenched, tie, loosened his breathing loud enough to echo in the vaulted ceiling. Each replay felt like a fresh blow, each cheer from the Phoenix Hall, another fracture in the armor he had built around his ego. "Get me talking points," he roared, slamming his palm onto the resolute desk hard enough to rattle the pens. Aides scrambled, some clutching laptops, others shuffling papers they hadn't even had time to read. One suggested calling it fake, another muttered about framing it as a media conspiracy, but their voices cracked under the weight of his fury. Trump's face burned, red sweat glistening under the desk lamp, his eyes darting between the screens like a man hunted by his own reflection. He shouted again, louder, "Desperate, draft me, something fast. We're not letting him get away with this." The demand wasn't strategy, it was panic, a man clawing for control as it slipped through his fingers. His aides exchanged silent glances, the kind born of fear, knowing nothing they produced could erase the image already seared into the nation's mind. Their boss wasn't fighting Obama anymore. He was fighting the clip. Trump stormed to the window, staring out into the darkness of the South Lawn, his reflection staring back, fractured by the glass. "They're laughing at me," he muttered, voice trembling for the first time more to himself than to anyone else. "They think he won." The admission hung heavy, his shoulders sagging for just a breath before his fist tightened again. He spun back, barking at his staff. Fix it now." The room reeked of fear, not just his, but theirs. The clatter of keyboards filled the silence, aides typing furiously, their screens flashing, hollow words rigged, biased, staged. But they knew it wouldn't be enough. The internet didn't care for talking points. It cared for the raw, unfiltered moment that had already gone viral. Trump slammed the desk one final time, the sound sharp, final, desperate. His voice cracked as he shouted, "If we don't crush this, it crushes me." And in that crack, in that tremor, the truth of the night revealed itself. This wasn't strength, it was collapse. While the White House burned with fury, the Phoenix Hall carried a different kind of silence. The ovation had faded, the crowd still buzzing with adrenaline, but Obama didn't lean into the victory. He didn't smile wider, didn't gloat, didn't so much as raise his voice. He waited until the clapping died on its own, then simply folded his hands and returned to the conversation as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred. "Democracy," he said evenly, "isn't a game you win by shouting. It's the work of listening, of building, of carrying the responsibility people entrust to you." The room softened again, applause turning from thunder to something gentler, like rain easing on a roof. The audience felt it, the weight of dignity, the refusal to indulge in spectacle, the calm of a man unwilling to trade substance for performance. Backstage, his aides whispered to reporters who pressed for answers. Was that line rehearsed? Was it planted? A staffer shook his head, almost smiling. "No planned line," he said. "Pure instinct." Another added quietly, "That's just who he is, steady when it matters." The words carried the kind of authenticity spin could never fake, and reporters scribbled them down like gospel. On stage, Obama spoke not as a man who had just delivered a viral blow, but as a teacher returning to the lesson. He talked of responsibility, of citizenship, of what it meant to serve more than yourself. The audience listened hushed now, aware they were watching not just a comeback, but a contrast between a man raging to be heard and a man who didn't need to shout at all. And in that refusal to celebrate his own strike, Obama left behind something sharper than triumph, dignity. It was not the noise of victory that resonated, but the stillness after the quiet that reminded everyone watching that true power isn't proven in the heat of applause, it's proven in the calm that follows. By morning, the clip had leapt oceans. On the BBC, anchors replayed the line with British restraint, their voices hushed but tinged with awe. When you have to keep telling people you're winning, the sentence scrolled across the bottom of the screen as analysts compared it to Churchillian brevity, a single phrase able to slice through bluster. The Guardian ran its headline in stark type, "Composure defeats chaos, Obama silences Trump on live TV." In Doha, Al Jazeera replayed the hall's eruption for audiences across the Middle East, their commentary highlighting the contrast. "The world saw two Americas tonight," the anchor said. "One that shouts, one that steadies. Which one will endure in Paris?" Le Monde columnist wrote that the exchange symbolized more than politics. It was a mirror of Western democracy under fire, struggling between spectacle and substance. Screens in Nairobi, Berlin, and Tokyo carried the same moment replayed with subtitles in half a dozen languages. Each frame told the same story: a raging face on a giant screen and a calm man in a chair whose quiet words detonated louder than fury. The contrast became international shorthand images of Obama's composure, side by side with Trump's unraveling. Memes translated effortlessly. The visual language needed no interpreter. In capitals across Europe, officials whispered about what the clash revealed. Some saw reassurance that America still housed leaders who understood restraint. Others saw danger that the nation's fractures had become so visible they could be broadcast in real time to the world. Yet all agreed on one thing: it wasn't the shouting that defined the night, it was the calm sentence that cut through it. Even in countries hostile to American influence, the clip was replayed as a lesson. State media in Moscow sneered at the spectacle, but not without acknowledging the viral power of Obama's line. In Beijing, commentators analyzed the phrase as though it were strategy, dissecting its timing, its precision, its capacity to destabilize an opponent without raising volume. The irony was inescapable. A single sentence born in a Phoenix hall had become subject of debate in foreign ministries an ocean away. And as the world weighed the moment, the question lingered, stretching far beyond America's borders, into boardrooms, parliaments, and cafes alike. Can one calm sentence ripple beyond borders? The clip had traveled the world, but its true power revealed itself in the small, ordinary corners of America. In living rooms across the country, families replayed the moment not once, not twice, but over and over, each repetition stitching it deeper into memory. Parents leaned forward on couches, explaining to their children why the line mattered, why calm could silence chaos. "Listen," one father said, pointing to the screen. "That's not just politics, that's what strength really looks like." The children nodded, some too young to grasp the weight of history, but old enough to feel its echo. In classrooms, the sentence was already being carved into lessons. A high school civics teacher in Ohio paused her projector and wrote the line across the whiteboard in bold marker. "When you have to keep telling people you're winning, it usually means you're losing where it matters most." Her students copied it into notebooks, some underlining it twice. She explained that history wasn't only about wars and treaties, it was about words that revealed the truth in moments of noise. The students sat quiet, their eyes fixed on the screen, sensing they were not studying the past but the present as it transformed into parable. At a community center in Atlanta, elders gathered for their weekly meeting, the television flickering with the clip once again. A retired veteran shook his head slowly, repeating the line under his breath as though testing its weight. "That's how you talk to power," he said, his voice carrying the authority of lived battles. The others murmured in agreement, some clapping softly, others simply staring at the screen with eyes glassy from memory. The moment was no longer just entertainment, it was ritual, a story retold until it became shared truth. Around kitchen tables, debates simmered, but always circled back to the same words. A mother in Phoenix told her teenage son, "You'll remember this one day when you're older. You'll tell your kids you watched it happen." In New York, grandparents told their grandchildren about other famous lines in American history, placing Obama's words in the same lineage. The young ones giggled at the idea of a chuckle toppling fury, but they remembered it, repeating the line to each other like a game, not realizing they were carrying history forward. The moment spilled into sermons, speeches, and even casual conversations on buses and in grocery stores. Ministers wove the phrase into Sunday lessons, calling it a reminder that true power is never about shouting, but about honesty. Coaches quoted it in locker rooms before big games, urging their players to hold steady under pressure. Everywhere it appeared, the line shifted shape, lesson joke, warning inspiration, but its core remained intact. It was no longer just Obama's. It belonged to everyone who repeated it. The story had become parable. A father to a son, a teacher to her class, a veteran to his neighbors, each retelling, etched the moment deeper into the collective memory. The words once spoken in a hall under hot lights now lived in the cadence of ordinary voices. They were whispered, debated, scribbled, and taught proof that sometimes the sharpest cut in history is not a speech or a scream, but a single sentence carried endlessly forward. The frenzy of headlines had begun to cool, but the analysis was only sharpening. In studios lit with blue and gold, commentators leaned into microphones, their voices carrying the weight of revelation. "He didn't out-yell him," one analyst declared on NPR, her tone hushed, as if unveiling a truth long forgotten. "He out-truthed him." The phrase caught fire, repeated across networks, printed in op-eds, whispered in classrooms and dinner tables alike. It wasn't the noise that lingered in memory, it was the contrast. Viewers replayed the moment not to marvel at Trump's fury, but to study the calm that had dismantled it. The gasps, the laughter, the ovation, all of it stemmed from a silence that refused to bend. Restraint had done what rage could not. It had commanded the room, and in commanding it, reshaped the story. In households divided by politics, the reflection cut deep. A mother in Michigan told her daughter, "Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the weakest one." A grandfather in Georgia nodded slowly as he watched the clip on loop. "That's why it worked," he said. "He didn't fight noise with noise. He let the truth do the fighting." These were not just observations, they were lessons carved into memory, distilled into wisdom simple enough for anyone to carry. Analysts framed the night as more than political theater. They called it a study in character. "Restraint is not weakness," one panelist said on ABC, her words sharp against the backdrop of footage replaying yet again. "Restraint is power when used at the right moment." Another chimed in. "This wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning. The world saw chaos, and then it saw composure. And composure won." The framing spread quickly, hashtags morphing into slogans, the clip evolving from viral moment into moral touchstone. Across the country, people wrestled with the meaning. Was it proof that truth could still matter in a world drowning in noise? Was it a rare glimpse of dignity in an era addicted to spectacle? The line became a mirror reflecting back not only America's hunger for honesty, but also its exhaustion with the theater of rage. It reminded people that leadership at its core was not measured in decibels, but in depth. Obama himself remained silent about the virality, declining to comment beyond the hall. But perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that authenticity does not need to be chased, it only needs to be lived. His instinctive restraint became the embodiment of dignity, the kind of dignity that cannot be rehearsed or spun, only revealed in the crucible of pressure. The moment taught not just that truth could cut through noise, but that silence, when wielded with purpose, could echo louder than a scream. And as America continued to replay, retell, and reflect, one realization rose above the static. The night in Phoenix was not about who won an argument. It was about who carried the truth without needing to shout. In that realization, people found inspiration not just for politics, but for life itself. Restraint over rage, steadiness over spectacle, truth over noise. The echoes of that night in Phoenix did not fade quickly. They lingered in the pauses between conversations, in the quiet moments when televisions dimmed, but memories remained lit. People remembered not the fury of a man shouting into a microphone, but the composure of another who refused to raise his voice. It was a reminder carved into the nation's conscience. Real strength doesn't always arrive like thunder. It often arrives like stone, unshaken, immovable. In homes where families argued over politics until voices cracked, the clip played as a counterpoint, teaching a lesson louder than any sermon. In classrooms, teachers reminded students that shouting does not prove victory, and calm does not equal weakness. In churches, pulpits echoed the sentiment that truth spoken steadily will always cut deeper than lies screamed in desperation. The message seeped into the fabric of daily life, transcending party lines, reshaping the definition of leadership. Obama himself had not sought to make the line immortal. He had simply spoken it instinctively with the gravity of a man who believed silence could be as sharp as speech. But its resonance revealed something America had nearly forgotten, that restraint can be a form of defiance, that composure can disarm chaos more effectively than fury. The viral moment was not born from cleverness or performance, but from authenticity. And authenticity, once recognized, cannot be undone. For Trump, the night became a shadow he could not outrun. Every time he raised his voice in the weeks that followed, the world remembered the crack in his tone that Phoenix had captured. Every boast carried the echo of Obama's line, every declaration of winning, mocked by the reminder that needing to say it proved the opposite. Fury had failed him. The noise no longer masked the emptiness beneath. For the public, the story became more than spectacle. It became a parable. Parents retold it to their children not as gossip, but as guidance. Veterans invoked it as proof that calm courage outweighs reckless aggression. Activists used it to remind their movements that steady truth has more endurance than explosive rage. In these retellings, the viral moment transformed into something larger, a compass pointing toward the kind of leadership people wish to see. The lesson was simple yet heavy. Strength is not the loudest voice in the room. Strength is the one that endures when the noise collapses. And in a nation addicted to spectacle, that reminder struck like a warning bell. The applause would fade, the headlines would shift, the hashtags would die, but the principle would remain, waiting for the next moment to test whether America had learned. And so as the final clip replayed for the millionth time, looping endlessly across phones and screens, the question grew heavier, sharper, impossible to ignore when the noise fades. Will we choose leaders who shout or those who let truth speak for itself? In life, true strength is rarely found in shouting the loudest. It's found in standing steady when chaos erupts around you. Obama's calm in Phoenix reminds us that dignity, patience, and truth can cut deeper than rage or noise. For those of us over 50, it's a call to remember that leadership begins at home, in families, and in communities, showing restraint when anger tempts, choosing wisdom over impulse. The world may celebrate volume, but history honors composure. The lesson is simple: steadiness inspires. Action question. In your own life, where can you choose calm over noise this week? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.